You know that moment when someone says something so outrageous, so completely twisted that your brain just stops, like the world tilts sideways and you're not sure you heard correctly? That's exactly what happened when my husband of 12 years looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should be grateful for my affair. Now you finally know how a real woman feels." I'm sitting here now, months later, still trying to process those words. Grateful for his infidelity. As if his betrayal was some kind of twisted gift, a lesson I apparently needed to learn about womanhood. The audacity of it still takes my breath away. But here's the thing about rock bottom: it gives you a solid foundation to build your comeback. And oh, did I build one. Though I have to warn you, this story doesn't end where you think it will. In fact, everything you're about to hear, well, let's just say that sometimes the truth is so much stranger than the lie that you almost wish you'd never discovered it. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my husband's cruel words became the catalyst for the most shocking revelation of my life. Before I tell you about the devastation, let me paint you a picture of what I thought was my perfect life. Michael and I met in college. He was the charming economics major who could make even the most boring statistics sound fascinating. I was studying literature, completely smitten by his confidence and the way he seemed to have everything figured out. We built what I believed was a beautiful life together. I worked as a freelance editor from home, which gave me the flexibility to manage our household while he climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm. We had our routine down to an art form: morning coffee together, him leaving for work in his perfectly pressed suits, me working from our sunlit home office, then cozy dinners where he'd tell me about his day, and I'd share whatever manuscript I was working on. Michael was attentive in ways that made me feel cherished. He'd bring me flowers for no reason, remember my favorite tea, and always seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. When I expressed insecurities about my career, the unpredictable income, the isolation of working alone, he'd reassure me that my work was important, that I was contributing something valuable to the world. Our friends used to joke that we were relationship goals. The couple who still held hands at dinner parties, who remembered each other's favorite everything, who seemed to have figured out the secret to lasting love. I basked in those comments, proud of what we'd built together. But looking back now, I realized there were whispers of something else. Small things that seemed insignificant at the time. He developed this habit of working late more frequently, claiming big projects demanded his attention. His phone became an extension of his hand, always checking it, always responding to urgent messages. When I'd glance over casually, he'd tilt the screen away, explaining it was just boring work stuff. There were the new clothes too. Suddenly, Michael was upgrading his wardrobe, buying expensive cologne, hitting the gym with religious dedication. When I complimented his efforts, he'd shrug and say it was important to maintain professional standards in his industry. I was proud of him, actually. My successful, ambitious husband taking care of himself. The business trips increased. Chicago, San Francisco, New York, always for critical meetings or conferences. He'd return with stories about exhausting presentations and difficult clients, looking genuinely tired. I'd welcome him home with his favorite meal, never questioning why he seemed different somehow. More distant, more satisfied. His social media habits changed too. Michael had never been particularly active online, but suddenly he was constantly posting professional updates, networking photos, articles about industry trends. He'd spend hours crafting the perfect LinkedIn post, asking for my input on wording. I thought it was career ambition. Now I wonder if he was performing for someone else's attention. Here's what's confusing though, and this is where the story gets strange. Michael wasn't just maintaining our relationship during all this, he was actually becoming more romantic, more attentive. He'd surprise me with weekend getaways, expensive jewelry, elaborate date nights. It was like he was trying to prove something, though I couldn't understand what. The turning point came when I decided to surprise him. It was our anniversary, and I discovered he had to work late again. I thought I'd bring dinner to his office, his favorite Thai takeout, and a bottle of wine. When I arrived at his building, the security guard gave me a strange look. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson left about an hour ago, said he had dinner plans." My heart did this weird skip. Dinner plans? With whom? I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I drove around aimlessly for an hour, calling repeatedly, my mind racing through innocent explanations. Maybe he'd said he was working late but meant he was having a business dinner. Maybe I'd misunderstood. When he finally came home at midnight, he had lipstick on his collar. The lipstick wasn't even a subtle shade. It was this bold, crimson red that I would never wear, too dramatic, too attention-seeking for my taste. When I pointed it out, Michael looked down at his collar with what I can only describe as mild annoyance, like I'd just told him he had a coffee stain. "Oh, that's probably from Janet at the office," he said, unbuttoning his shirt. "She's Italian, you know how they are with the cheek kisses." Janet, I'd heard about Janet exactly twice in 12 years. Both times in passing, something about her being in accounting. Now suddenly, she was Italian and affectionate enough to leave lipstick traces on my husband's collar at midnight. But here's the thing about being a trusting wife: you want to believe. Your brain performs these incredible mental gymnastics to make the pieces fit. So I convinced myself that maybe some cultures are more physically expressive, maybe business dinners run late, maybe I was being paranoid. The next few weeks were torture. I found myself becoming someone I didn't recognize, checking his phone when he showered, scrutinizing credit card statements, even following him to work one morning just to see if he actually went there. He did, but he also left 3 hours early. I started noticing things that had been invisible before. The way he'd shower immediately when he came home, even after supposedly sitting in meetings all day. How he'd developed specific preferences about which restaurants we went to, always steering us away from certain parts of town. The defensive way he'd respond to innocent questions about his day, as if I were interrogating him rather than showing interest. My sleep became fractured. I'd lie awake analyzing every conversation, every gesture, every change in his behavior. I'd study his face when he thought I wasn't looking, searching for signs of guilt or deception. The man I'd loved and trusted for 12 years was becoming a stranger, and I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, suspicious, anxious, constantly on edge. The breaking point came when I decided to do something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Detective Riley, and she had this matter-of-fact way of speaking that somehow made my request seem both completely reasonable and utterly heartbreaking. "Most wives already know," she told me during our first meeting. "They just need proof to move forward." She was right, deep down I knew, but nothing could have prepared me for the photos she presented 2 weeks later. Michael wasn't just having an affair, he was living an entirely different life. The woman wasn't Janet from accounting. Her name was Vanessa, and she was a yoga instructor 15 years younger than me, with the kind of effortless beauty that made my stomach clench. But the photos weren't just evidence of infidelity. They showed a version of Michael I'd never seen. He was animated, laughing, completely absorbed in this woman. In one photo, he was feeding her strawberries at some outdoor cafe. In another, they were dancing, actually dancing, on what appeared to be a beach. When was the last time Michael had danced with me? I couldn't remember. The detective's report was thorough and devastating. They'd been together for 8 months. He'd rented an apartment across town where they spent weekends. He'd told her he was divorced, that his marriage had ended amicably years ago. She had no idea I existed. But here's what destroyed me completely. According to the detective's observations, Michael wasn't just cheating. He was happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way I realized he hadn't been with me in years, maybe ever. There were photos of them at farmers' markets, art galleries, hiking trails, all the things Michael had always claimed didn't interest him when I'd suggested them. With her, he was outdoorsy, cultured, spontaneous. All the things he'd never been with me. When I confronted him that evening, I expected denials, excuses, maybe even anger. Instead, he looked almost relieved. He sat down heavily on our couch, put his head in his hands, and said, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." No apology, no remorse, just resignation. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That's when he looked up at me with those eyes I'd loved for 12 years and delivered the words that would haunt me forever. "Because with her, I remember what it feels like to be alive. Sarah, you're a wonderful woman, but you're not. You're not passionate, you're not exciting, you're safe. Safe, like it was a disease. You should be grateful for my affair," he continued, his voice gaining strength as if he was convincing himself. "Now you finally know how a real woman feels. You've experienced jealousy, desire, the fear of losing someone. Before this, you were just existing. The cruelty of it took my breath away. He was reframing his betrayal as a gift, his infidelity as some kind of awakening for me, as if I should thank him for showing me what real emotion felt like. But what came next was even worse. He wanted to stay married, to both of us. I love you both, he said, as if this was a reasonable solution. Just differently. Sarah, you're my stability, my foundation. Vanessa is my passion, my adventure. Why can't I have both? That night, as I lay in our bed listening to him sleep peacefully beside me, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The quiet, accommodating woman he'd married was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of things I'd never imagined. And that's when I began to plan. I'd never considered myself a vengeful person, but betrayal has a way of revealing parts of yourself you didn't know existed. For weeks, I meticulously planned what I thought would be the perfect revenge. I was going to expose Michael's double life to everyone who mattered, his colleagues, his family, his precious Vanessa, who still believed she was dating a divorced man. I compiled everything: the detective's photos, credit card statements showing his secret apartment payments, hotel receipts, even screenshots of romantic texts I'd found on his phone. I crafted emails to his boss, his mother, his best friend. I was going to destroy the carefully constructed image he'd built, show everyone the manipulative liar he really was. I spent hours perfecting each message, making sure the tone was hurt but dignified, devastated but not hysterical. I wanted them to see Michael's betrayal clearly, without being able to dismiss me as an unhinged wife. I researched his company's policies on personal conduct, knowing that his affair could have professional consequences. I even found Vanessa's social media profiles, planning to send her the evidence of his lies. The satisfaction I felt while planning this destruction was intoxicating. For the first time in months, I felt powerful instead of powerless. I imagined Michael's face when his carefully constructed world came crashing down. I pictured his mother's disappointment, his boss's disapproval, Vanessa's shock and disgust. I created fake social media accounts to monitor their online activity, taking screenshots of their public displays of affection that I could use as evidence. I documented everything: restaurant receipts, hotel bookings, even parking tickets from the area where his secret apartment was located. The plan was to send everything simultaneously on a Friday afternoon: maximum impact, maximum humiliation. I'd reserved a moving truck for Saturday morning and found a small apartment across town. By the time Michael realized what had happened, I'd be gone, and his entire world would be in ruins. But 3 days before my planned revelation, something unexpected happened. Michael came home early from work, looking different. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something I hadn't seen in months: vulnerability. He sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, and did something that caught me completely off guard. He started crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears of someone who'd been caught, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. For several minutes, he couldn't even speak. I sat there, watching this man I'd lived with for 12 years fall apart, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Sarah," he finally managed, his voice raw. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you say anything." I almost laughed. After everything he'd put me through, after his cruel words about gratitude and real women, he wanted me to listen. But something in his expression stopped me. This wasn't the Michael who'd casually dismissed my pain. This was someone who looked genuinely terrified. "I ended it with Vanessa," he said quietly. 3 days ago, completely. She doesn't understand, but I told her I can't see her anymore." I felt my carefully constructed rage waver slightly. Why? Because I realized something, and it's been eating me alive. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve like a child. "Sarah, those horrible things I said to you about being grateful, about learning to feel like a real woman. I was trying to convince myself that what I was doing was somehow justified. But the truth is, I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that I wasn't enough for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the explanation I'd expected. "You're brilliant, Sarah. You're talented and thoughtful, and you see the world in ways I never could. And somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was boring you, like I wasn't interesting enough to keep your attention. So I convinced myself that you didn't really need me, that you were just settling. He reached across the table, and I found myself not pulling away. Vanessa made me feel necessary, he continued. She laughed at my jokes, she seemed impressed by my job, she made me feel like I was this exciting, desirable man. But Sarah, she fell in love with a lie. She fell in love with the version of myself that I thought you wanted me to be. I stared at him, my mind reeling. So you decided to have both, to keep me for stability and her for excitement. I was selfish and stupid and cruel, he said, his voice breaking again. I thought I could compartmentalize my life, keep the parts that made me feel good about myself separate from the parts that felt like responsibility. But I was wrong about everything. About you, about what you needed, about what would make me happy. His phone buzzed on the table between us. Without thinking, he flipped it over to show me the screen. A text from Vanessa, "Please don't do this. We can work through whatever's wrong." She's been texting constantly, he said. She doesn't understand why I won't see her anymore. She thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown. Then he did something that completely shattered my resolve. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text conversation with Vanessa from 3 days earlier. She was begging him to reconsider, saying she'd told her friends about their relationship, that she'd been planning to introduce him to her parents. The conversation ended with Michael writing, "I'm sorry, but I need to try to save my marriage. I love my wife, and I've been lying to both of us about who I really am." "Sarah," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "I don't want to be the man who had an affair. I want to be the man who chose his wife. I want to be the man who fights for what we built together. But I need to know, is there anything left to fight for?" I sat there, staring at this broken man who'd caused me so much pain, and I realized something shocking. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how we'd gotten so lost, how two people who'd loved each other could become such strangers. But even as part of me softened, another part held firm. Because sincere or not, some wounds cut too deep to heal. The days that followed Michael's confession were some of the strangest of my life. I found myself caught between two powerful forces, the part of me that wanted to believe in redemption and the part that knew some betrayals change you forever. I didn't send those emails. I didn't execute my revenge plan. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I agreed to try counseling. Not because I thought we could go back to what we were, but because I needed to understand how we'd become people who could hurt each other so deeply. Dr. Martinez, our therapist, helped us unpack layers of miscommunication and assumption that had built up over years. Michael's affair wasn't just about passion or excitement, it was about his own deep insecurities and his inability to communicate his needs. My quiet contentment, which I'd thought was peaceful love, he'd interpreted as indifference. We'd been living parallel lives, each assuming the other was satisfied. The sessions were brutal. We said things that had been festering for years. Michael admitted he'd felt invisible in our marriage, that he'd started the affair because he needed to feel desired. I admitted that I'd become complacent, that I'd stopped seeing him as a person with his own struggles, and had started seeing him as simply my husband, a role, not a man. We discovered that we'd both been performing versions of ourselves we thought the other wanted. I'd been the perfect, understanding wife who never complained or demanded attention. He'd been the successful provider who handled all the real-world problems. Neither of us had been authentic about our needs or fears. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that affairs often happen in good marriages, not just bad ones. That the betrayal isn't always about the relationship lacking something, but about individuals lacking something within themselves. Michael's affair was his misguided attempt to feel alive again, to recapture a sense of identity he'd lost somewhere along the way. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness, at least not immediately. For months, we sat in that sterile office, dissecting our marriage like forensic scientists examining evidence. We talked about love languages, attachment styles, communication patterns. We did exercises where we had to express our needs without blame, where we had to listen without defending. Slowly, painfully, I began to see the scared man behind the betrayal. The man who'd convinced himself that being a good husband meant being boring, that stability meant sacrificing passion. The man who'd been so afraid of disappointing me that he'd created an entire alternate life where he could be someone else. But here's what I learned about forgiveness. It's not about forgetting or excusing. It's about releasing the poison that revenge carries. Every day I'd spent planning his humiliation, I'd been giving him power over my peace. The hatred was eating me alive, not him. The turning point came during a particularly difficult session when Michael broke down completely. Not the performative crying he'd done at our kitchen table, but genuine, raw grief for what we'd lost. He wasn't crying because he might lose me, he was crying because he'd already lost himself. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he sobbed. "I used to be someone who kept his word, who honored his commitments. I used to be someone I could respect. And now I'm just this person who lies and hurts people and justifies it all with self-pity." In that moment, I realized that my revenge would have been hollow. The man I'd wanted to destroy was already destroyed. The punishment I'd planned would have been redundant. He was already living in hell, trapped by his own choices and their consequences. After 3 months of therapy, I made a decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. I forgave Michael. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of anger I'd been carrying. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. "I release you from my anger," I told him during our final session together. "But I also release myself from this marriage. We became people who could betray and hurt each other, and I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to remember the love we had without trying to rebuild it on this foundation." Michael cried again, but this time I think they were tears of understanding rather than desperation. He knew, just as I did, that some chapters end not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with the quiet recognition that two people can love each other and still not be right for each other. The divorce was amicable. We split our assets fairly, kept our mutual friends, and even managed to laugh together sometimes during the process. The man who told me to be grateful for his affair became someone I could genuinely wish well, even as I walked away from him forever. I learned something profound about boundaries in those months, that healthy forgiveness doesn't require you to keep harmful people in your life. You can release anger without accepting continued hurt. You can choose peace without choosing reconciliation. Now when I think about those cruel words, "You should be grateful for my affair," I almost smile. Because in the strangest way, he was right. Not because his betrayal taught me to feel like a real woman, but because it taught me to feel like a whole person. Someone who could forgive without being foolish, who could love without losing herself, who could walk away from even a good man if staying meant compromising her own peace. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you, it's becoming someone who can no longer be hurt in the same way. It's building a life so full of purpose and joy that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss. Today, I live alone in a cozy apartment filled with books and plants, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are. I've discovered parts of myself that were dormant during my marriage. I paint now. I travel solo. I've made friends who know me as Sarah, not as half of a couple. And Michael, last I heard, he was still single, still searching for that perfect balance between stability and passion. I hope he finds it, I really do. Just not with me. Because some stories don't end with reconciliation or revenge. Sometimes they end with the quiet dignity of two people who loved each other enough to let go.